I have to go back when you think about what's happened there is really the United States hasn't played a major role there in kind of de-escalating the situation because President Biden hasn't done a lot in talking to Netanyahu. Vice President Harris hasn't done very much. I mean, she actually stiffed Netanyahu when he came here into the joint session of Congress when he spoke. And you've got Blinken going over there on his ninth trip, no ceasefire. And you got the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, heading to China instead of going to the Middle East. Now, I know C.Q. Brown's going to be there, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. But you kind of got to focus in on what's going to happen there and prevent something from happening into the future. And they haven't done it. But the Israelis have done it. So the Israelis have done, actually, is reset deterrence in the region. And I think it's smart. And I think it's put Hezbollah on their back foot. And it's clearly put the Iranians on their back foot, that they haven't done anything at all.
Has what Israel did last night with the strike into Hezbollah in Lebanon, did that put Iran on its back foot? And are they now going to rethink whether they should retaliate for what happened in their capital?
No, absolutely not. I mean, this idea that somehow, first of all, this idea that it was, as you heard American commentators, this preemptive strike that stopped Hezbollah. Hezbollah launched like 350 Katyusha rockets and a whole bunch of drones, some of which might have hit Israel's, the equivalent of their NSA. We don't know. We can't believe anything the Israelis say, of course, and we just don't know. But yeah, this idea that this has reestablished deterrence and somehow this is going to cause the Iranians to back off, it's just madness. And then it's as untrue as this idea that somehow Biden hasn't done enough to support Israel, which is basically what Kellogg was alluding to there, which is funny because it comes on the same day that we saw figures coming out of Israel through the Times of Israel that say that there have been more than 500 747 and C-17 flights of munitions, equipment, supplies, and 107 ships. You guys know how big a ship is? And actually it comes out to the Times of Israel report that since October 7th, the U.S. has sent 50,000 tons of military supplies to Israel. Among that is 14,000 2,000-pound bombs, right? So this idea that I will agree with Kellogg, though, because he says Biden hasn't done enough to de-escalate it. He doesn't mean it in the sense that a normal, rational, honest person would mean it, but he hasn't done anything to de-escalate it. What he's done is been able to be escalated because of his actions,
Okay. Next thing he said was, fortunately, he makes it simple for all of us to understand. This is really not a problem. There's a good guys and there's bad guys. And all we got to do is be on the side of the good guys. And this is not going to be a problem. Watch this.
The problem you get is if something like this extends, which it's done, it makes it harder to put back in the box, to make it put it into a situation which is sustainable in peace in the region. And that is because, frankly, we kind of backed away and we said, well, there's pox on both sides of the house. Wrong. The way you handle that is you tell the entire region, you tell the world, we are behind the Israelis, full stop. There's a good side and a bad side, and we need to do it. Because we haven't done it, we've created a seam, a gap. And adversaries look for seams and gaps, and they've basically done that. And so they say, okay, we can attack because the United States is not going to come back hard. And I think how you have to reset the fight, you have to tell everybody in the region who we're for and who we're not for. And we really haven't done that. So it's going to take a bit to put it back in the box because Hezbollah is going to keep attacking. Iran's going to keep supporting the attackers in Hezbollah.
And that last part there, Matt, we haven't done it. We haven't said who the good guys and who the bad guys are. We need to really do that. Yeah, I don't know how much harder we could get than that.
Yeah, the countries in the region don't know whose side we're on. We're sending mixed messages here.
Very mixed messages.
If there's anything I think of our conversation for folks who are watching this, I think is really important to take away of everything we said. The scariest thing is what you just heard there, in the sense that this is what a national security advisor to the president of the United States looks like. Kellogg was Pence's national security advisor. He was the chief of staff for the National Security Council. This is what a modern American NSA national security advisor looks like. They are political. There is not one shred of professionalism, of competence, of actual honest analysis in anything they say. Everything they say is geared through a partisan American political lens meant to achieve some type of political, institutional, or individual gain. And that's the reality. And Jake Sullivan is no different in this. And that was a good exposure. How can you have a man who has a national security advisor frame the situation in the Middle East in the way he just framed it, unless he is just a complete political grifter?
No, and you could certainly say, I mean, Secretary of State Blinken is in some ways worse in some of the things he says. But you have Blinken, you have Austin, you have here Kellogg that just said the U.S. should be unequivocally full stop behind whatever Israel wants to do, and no consideration to the Palestinians. 5 million people in the West Bank and Gaza, which aren't even in his calculation. And that's why when he says good guys, bad guys, he eliminates them as even an entity. And that's one of the big so-called disputes on the American side, especially in the Democratic side among their voting population, is that they care a lot, a good portion of them, about the Palestinian people. And that's where a lot of the pressure is getting on the Biden-Harris administration. He wants to just eliminate that. Don't even worry about them. Let's go all in with Israel no matter what. And I personally found that morally repugnant.
It is. It is. It's scaremongering. It's this. There's a social scientist in the 50s, a big fan of his, guy named C. Wright Mills. He called it the higher immorality. This idea that the rules, the moral rules as we understand them, don't apply to the elite. And that the American public accepts that and it allows for it. This higher immorality that people like Kellogg, people like Blinken, they can say whatever they want. They don't have to adhere to actually what reality is because they are among the elite, and the elite are forgiven for any trespasses on anything that we would be held accountable for as ourselves. And you see that this idea that you have a man who is presumptively possibly the next national security advisor in a Trump administration on the biggest cable news network in the United States, just saying things that are just patently untrue, things that are false, things that are just so different from what the reality is. And it's all part of the show, folks. It's all part of the show. Just let it proceed, And so the idea that you have in the Oval Office, this is the advice. You could break, Danny, you could go in there. Doug McGregor could go in there. John Mearsheimer, Jeff Sachs, all these folks that you have come on who really understand things and could really give really great objective advice that is strong, because you look back at these people's records and you say, man, that guy was right about that and that and that. It wouldn't matter. It wouldn't matter because it's a filter that the empire puts in place, that in the filter themselves are people like Kellogg, who are, again, political grifters. He was a 3-star general at one point, but I bet anything he sucked. I mean, like I got to say, and it was all about himself, all about climbing the career ladder, those kind of things. I know he's decorated in Vietnam, he's special forces in Cambodia. I know all that, but still, you look at this and you say, how could someone say something so completely divorced from reality?
Okay, and here's the problem. That's been a good assessment thus up to this point. What I'm about to play takes it to a whole new level of disconnected from reality. Watch this.
I think the Hamas fight is virtually over. I think Israelis has kind of solved that problem. Look, when the leader of Hamas has said, if we have peace discussions and we have a ceasefire, I want to make sure that I'm not a target. Sinwar, nope. You started that fight. You're at risk right now. But I think that fight is virtually over now. The Israelis can pivot to Hezbollah.
So good news, man. The Hamas war is effectively over.
Yeah.
What planet is he on? What is he talking about? That thing is not even close to being over.
Right. And I think he honestly does believe that it started on October 7th. He makes that comment there. Hey,
yeah.
I think he honestly, in his mind, there is no pretext to this. There is no antecedent or anything. This all started, history started October 7th. And I think there are people, believe it or not, because I know the folks who watch this aren't like that. Folks who watch this show, you study history, you follow current events, you take this stuff seriously. But there are a lot of people. I mean, that's what I would say about people asking about Washington, D.C. What's so surprising about it is how ahistorical the knowledge is. And I would say this too. People ask about Afghanistan and Iraq, and I would say, you know what's going to shock you? The number of American diplomats and military officers who actually read a book about Iraq or a book about Afghanistan before they went over there, single-digit percentage. That the idea that this becomes cumbersome, it's inconvenient. And then if you're, again, a political grifter like General Kellogg, it becomes very troublesome to the narrative that you're trying to throw out there.
Yeah, it's hard for me to fathom by the way, we have a few more minutes here. It's hard for me to fathom how we get to a point like this, that we have, I haven't read that work you're talking about. I might be interested in going to find it, but that there is this almost acceptance among the regular people of a behavior and a commentary and the lies and distortions at the upper levels that would never be tolerated at a normal human level, when the consequences of that could be so catastrophic. Now, I fear that, for example, with the Afghan fiasco that you and I have been beating our heads about, on each other's shoulders since 2009, about how absurd it is and how it was destined for a loss, and all the consequence and all the people in Afghanistan that paid with such a terrible price, how predictable the end was, etc. But when the predictable end came, and you had the Petraeuses and even the Lindsey Grahams and all these other people who say it was everybody else's fault except their own, even though they advocated for it, there was no real cost to the United States. It's like another embarrassment, another Vietnam. Okay. And that didn't cost us anything here either. So we just keep going on. But one of these days, it's going to cost us something. Right now, it's costing the Palestinian people something, just an egregious cost. It's even costing the Israeli people a lot of cost, because this war is continuing to go on. He is dead wrong when he says this is about over. They have created so many more enemies in the Gaza Strip and in the West Bank than ever existed prior to October 7th because of what the Israelis done. So if they think that it's almost over, they're in for a very rude surprise. But I just don't know, and I'd like your view in the last comment here. Is there any hope that we're going to get to a point to where we're going to finally recognize that there is this duplicity from up here to down there that needs to be ended?
I don't know, Danny. I don't know. So C. Wright Mills, he wrote this. I think he coined it in The Causes of World War III. The other book that I recommend people read of his is The Power Elite. And he wrote those in like 55, 56, around that time frame. I want to thank my friend Jonathan, actually, who's a big fan of your show, because he reminded me of that phrase, the higher immorality, a couple of weeks ago when we were texting each other. So it's been percolating in my head, and I finally had an opportunity to, use it here. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I mean, in a sense of does it take cataclysm? Does it take disaster for us? Look, I mean, look at how Europe was with itself, its wars of the 19th century that then led directly to World War I, that then, of course, then led to World War II. It took all of that tragedy, all of that horror, all of that destruction to bring about a Europe that was somewhat peaceable for several decades, right? Yeah. Is it the same thing going to be required of us? We have a place in the United States where we don't feel these things. We feel like it's not going to affect us. And this is what our leaders bank on. This is what those in charge of the empire really cling to. This idea that we have buffers. Otto von Bismarck said, the United States has good neighbors to its north and south and fish to its east and west. Right. And Lincoln said this as well. We're protected by these two giant oceans. So this idea that we have buffers, and then, of course, we've talked about this, the buffer with the Ukraine war is Finland, it's Poland, it's Romania. So if things even get so bad to the point that Russia starts using tactical nuclear weapons or anything like that, where are they going to use them first? They're not going to use them on us. They can use them on the Finns or the Poles or the Latvians or the Romanians. Yeah. And at that point, then we can turn the dial down. Then we can de-escalate, because they're our buffer. And I wish the Europeans understood that more. That you are our buffer. So, and what we're doing is we're walking right into the long game of what the empire, who the empire's adversaries are. Their long game. So if you look at this idea of what Hezbollah is doing, what Iran is doing, what the Yemenis are doing in support of the Palestinians, but also to bring harm to Israel, it's a long-term strategy. Israel is bleeding out right now. Their economy is just every day it's hemorrhaging. Their tourism is shut down, right? I mean, foreign investment is dried up. Domestic investment is being shipped out. One of their ports, one of their 4 decent ports, is completely closed off. I mean, like, just on and on we could go. They got 200,000 internal refugees in a population of 8 million. You've got several 100,000 reservists called up in a population of 8 million. I mean, you've had 40,000 Israeli businesses go out of business since October 7th.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I mean, the numbers are, and then you look at what's happening on the political side. Right? You look at what's happening there, and you look at, okay, why should Iran launch a huge attack right now. Why should Hezbollah send anything more than 300 Katyusha rockets over the border? They don't need to. Next Tuesday, send 800 rockets. And then, on September 15th, launch a few ballistic missiles. It's interesting that Hezbollah was quick to point that out, actually, that they didn't use any of their ballistic missiles in their attack the other day. They only used their Katyushas, which, as everyone knows,
it's
the world
like bottle rockets.
and some drones. So you're like this, string this thing out and let the Israelis devolve and crack apart internally. I don't even know if Netanyahu's out of that bunker. Netanyahu's spent most of the last 2-3 weeks in a bunker, right? So is this long-term game, and balancing it with, okay, the Americans, Israel's whole card here is the Americans, and are the Americans really going to back an attack on Iran, and are the Israelis really stupid enough to invade Lebanon for the third time in 40 months? And even if they did, what would be the consequences then for them? Because you saw how disastrous both those things were.
Yep.
So, I think, you look at that and you say, God, our political leadership, it's just, it doesn't just not care about its own people, but it's grossly inept. Completely inept.
Well, we'll leave it there for right now because it pretty well puts a bow on it. I couldn't improve on anything you just said. So, appreciate you coming on and providing such clarity to this as you always do. And we're going to continue to track it, especially as events continue to happen in both the Middle East as well as in Europe. And we'll bring it to you as it comes live and look forward to having you back on very soon.